The email wasn't meant for me. And that was exactly why I saw it. It slipped into our shared family cloud at 3:17 inches the afternoon. Buried between routine confirmations and documents no one ever really looks at twice. Except this one stood out immediately. A luxury cruise booking. Full package. Upgraded suite. Private dining. Couples massage. Everything curated down to the smallest detail. And my husband's name was on it. The trip was scheduled for the same week he had already explained to me as a business conference. Something important. Something unavoidable. Something I had supported without hesitation. That alone would have been enough. But there was another name attached to the reservation. Vanessa. And the moment I read it, I didn't feel shocked the way people expect in moments like that. I felt alignment, because nothing about it felt sudden. It felt like something that had been happening long enough to become structured. Something that had existed quietly beside my life until it no longer needed to hide carefully. I opened the full itinerary, scrolling through every detail slowly, not searching for proof, but confirming what was already there. Cabin number, departure time, champagne package, everything precise, intentional, planned. And in that moment, what I understood wasn't just that he was going on that trip with someone else. It was that he had built something separate from me. Something complete enough that it didn't depend on whether I ever found out. The photo appeared minutes later, automatically synced into the same folder like it belonged there. Like it had every right to exist next to everything else in my life. And that was the part that made it feel deliberate rather than accidental. She stood in front of a mirror, wearing lingerie with the tags still attached, posing in a way that wasn't meant to be subtle, with a caption that removed any possible doubt about what the trip actually was. I recognized her immediately, not because she mattered to me, but because she had already been placed into my life before this moment under a completely different context. She had been in my house, standing in my living room during a holiday gathering, smiling politely, holding a glass of wine like she belonged there, like she understood the space she was moving through. At the time, she didn't stand out. Now, she made perfect sense. What stopped me from reacting wasn't denial. It was memory. A fragmented conversation I had overheard weeks earlier at a charity event where she mentioned her fiancé. Casually. Confidently. Describing a wedding that was already being planned. A future that clearly didn't include the man she was now preparing to travel with. That was the moment the situation shifted from something personal into something structured. This wasn't just betrayal happening in isolation. There were 4 people involved. 2 who knew exactly what they were doing, and 2 who had been intentionally kept outside of it. And once I understood that, the emotional part of the situation stopped being useful, because confronting him would have ended it too quickly. And I wasn't interested in something that simple. Be honest if you discovered something like this about your partner. Would you confront them immediately, or stay quiet and plan your next move? Comment what you would do. I found him in less than 10 minutes. Not because it was difficult, but because people like them rarely hide anything as carefully as they believe they do. Her fiancé's profile was public, curated in the way people present stability, success, a life that looks complete from the outside. And his most recent post mentioned a solo trip before the wedding. Something about clearing his head, preparing for the next chapter. The kind of narrative that makes sense until you place it next to something it was never meant to overlap with. The dates matched perfectly. That was all I needed. I didn't hesitate or overthink it. I sent him the booking confirmation directly. No explanation. No emotional framing. Just the facts presented in a way that couldn't be misinterpreted. His response came faster than I expected. Not confused. Not defensive. Just controlled. Where and when. That was it. No questions about context. No disbelief. Just immediate understanding. We met the next morning in a quiet cafe. Both of us arriving early. Both of us already aware that whatever this was, it had moved beyond something personal, the moment we saw the same evidence from different sides. There was no dramatic exchange. No need to explain what had happened, because neither of us needed confirmation anymore. We already had it. What mattered was what came next. And that was where everything changed. Confronting them would have been easy, immediate, emotionally satisfying for a moment, but it would have ended too quickly, given them an exit, a chance to rewrite the situation into something smaller than it actually was. Neither of us wanted that. They had built something behind our backs with time, with planning, with intention. We were going to dismantle it the same way, slowly, deliberately, and in a way that left nothing for them to reconstruct once it was over. The cruise wasn't an opportunity. It was a controlled environment, and that made it useful in a way confrontation never could. There were no exits. No real distance once we were all on board. No way for them to reset or disappear when things started shifting. I booked the cabin directly next to theirs within minutes of confirming the details, matching their timeline exactly, not out of impulse, but precision, making sure our presence would feel like coincidence before it became something they couldn't escape. The days leading up to departure were about maintaining the illusion. I drove my husband to the airport myself, listened to him explain his conference with the same confidence he had always used, helped him choose what to pack, nodded at the right moments, and watched him walk away believing everything was still under control. Meanwhile, every step we took was calculated, aligning our schedule with theirs, mapping out the structure of the trip before it even began. When we boarded the ship, we didn't approach them. Not immediately. We observed first. Distance gave us information, and information gave us control. The first time I saw them together on deck, relaxed, familiar, moving in a way that suggested this wasn't new, I understood something that mattered more than the betrayal itself. This wasn't their first time doing this. This was a pattern, repeated often enough that it no longer required effort. And patterns like that don't break from confrontation. They break when you remove the control the people inside them think they still have. The first confrontation didn't happen the way most people would expect. It wasn't loud. It wasn't chaotic. And that was exactly why it worked. It happened on the second day, on a beach crowded with strangers who had no context but understood exactly what they were witnessing the moment everything shifted. He saw me first, and the reaction was immediate. Not dramatic, but structural. Like something inside him failed to process what was in front of him fast enough to respond. She turned a second later, and in that moment, I saw the exact point where confidence turned into uncertainty. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse them. I smiled, greeted them like we had run into each other by accident, asked simple questions. Neutral, controlled, forcing them to respond within a version of reality that no longer existed. That was the beginning. What followed was slower, more deliberate. We didn't chase them or create scenes. We stayed close, always within view, turning every shared space into something they couldn't relax inside. At dinner, we sat near them. During excursions, we appeared just often enough to disrupt whatever they were trying to maintain. At night, through the thin walls of adjacent cabins, we listened, recorded, documented, not for emotion, but for structure, building something that would matter later. By the time we chose to escalate, it wasn't about catching them anymore. It was about showing them that every version of control they thought they had was already gone. And when the first real exposure happened, in a room full of people who had no reason to care but suddenly couldn't look away, it wasn't just about revealing the affair. It was about revealing how long it had been happening, how carefully it had been hidden, and how completely it had already fallen apart. By the time the cruise ended, there was nothing left for them to salvage. Not because of one moment, but because of everything that had been built against them without their awareness. The final exposure wasn't dramatic. It didn't need to be. It happened in a room full of people during one of the ship's events, where what we showed wasn't just proof of an affair, but a timeline, messages, image, records that turned their version of events into something impossible to deny or minimize. There was no space left for excuses. No angle left for them to reshape what had happened into something smaller, because every detail had already been laid out in a way that spoke for itself. After that, the consequences extended beyond the ship, reaching into the parts of their lives they thought were separate. His job, her financial situation. Everything connected in ways they hadn't considered when they believed this was contained. When I saw him again before we disembarked, he didn't try to explain, didn't try to defend himself, because he understood there was nothing left to say that would change anything. I told him the truth, not out of anger, but clarity, that this didn't start here, that he had simply run out of places to hide. Months later, when everything had settled, when the divorce was finalized and the fallout had fully reached them, I realized something that mattered more than anything else. I hadn't destroyed his life. I had removed myself from it. And without me, everything he had built collapsed on its own. So tell me, would you expose them like this? Or walk away and never look back? Drop your answer below. And if you want more stories like this, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next one.